Okay.
Do you want me to kick it off?
So Natalie asked me to give a presentation about my project management experience at ECC. This isn't gonna be a training course in project management. It's gonna be more focused on my experience, my history, how I got where I am, and mostly about the people that I connected with, because a lot of project management is technical stuff that you can pick up a book, you can even you can pick up a book about leadership, but you can pick up the technical stuff pretty easily. The leadership stuff, the connections with people is really the mentors you have along the way is really where it's at. So I want to talk mostly about that. My slides would advance. Okay, so just my quick history, my stats. I have a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering I got in 1992 from Northeastern University. I'm a registered professional engineer, environmental registration, Mass, Maine, Connecticut, and as of last week, Guam. I did my master's degree in project management also at Northeastern, finished that in 2012 following an ECC course that we did in 2009. While I did that master's degree, somehow convinced the faculty that I was worthy of joining them, and so I, in my spare time, I teach courses online for Northeastern. I do that remotely. It's usually one course a semester, and it's a lot of fun. I'm a registered PMP. I've mostly thanks to ECC had the pleasure of working all over the world. Not quite some of the dangerous places that others at ECC have gone, but I've worked the mainland, worked here in Hawaii, where I am now, Kuwait, Japan, Djibouti, Africa. Talk for a minute. I got my insights wheel up here just so people know who I am from that perspective. I actually really value the insights thing. I actually prefer this view because on the left it shows that I'm a little bit more green than blue, but most people see me as blue, and I embrace that. I spend a lot of time digging into details when it's necessary, and the blue energy has served me well as a project manager, to be honest. Back to the personal stuff. I moved to Hawaii in 2016 because that young woman in the lower left decided to move to California and decided she was never going back to Massachusetts because, like we just talked about, snow should be an option. That was her actual words to me. So I've been here since 2016. I came here for this really impressive, exciting opportunity to manage the largest project that I was ever offered, a $300 million rental car facility. Didn't turn out as I planned. I'll talk about that a little bit. I often get asked what's my favorite project, and it's really impossible to choose. I'm going to talk about some key projects and key connections that I made across the last 30 years. And they're all, favorites of mine in some way, mostly because of things that I've learned. And then at the very end, I'm going to talk about why I came back to ECC, because as we go through the next batch of slides, I've been at ECC technically 11 years, but it'd be more like 15 or 16 if I hadn't left from 2014 to 2019. So where did I start? So I'm Boston born and raised, lived there for 47 years. I did my bachelor's, like I said, in chemical engineering in Boston. At the time, I thought it was going to be, at the time, environmental industry was pursuing some really interesting, unique technology. And I had a really cool co-op job with Northeastern doing extraction with critical fluids, and it was all, it was a chemical engineer's dream job, right? But really, after I got out of school, I learned that really the environmental industry is about digging and hauling dirt or cleaning up a building and sending it off to be landfilled. And so my first real job was in Watertown, Mass, decommissioning a nuclear reactor. That's me, in case you didn't guess that. 1994, and that was the first time, I think I really found somebody that I considered a mentor, and was the project manager for this project, this guy named Tom Kivett, and really, there was nothing specific that I learned from Tom, but I just liked the way he operated. He was the kind of guy who was he could be really hard and direct at times, but after work we'd go to the man, it was a Holiday Inn that the faraway guys were staying at, and we'd have a drink, and he'd tell me a lot of really good personal stories about his own career, and I learned a lot from him. I also learned how not to be late for work from him. He gave me a really good lecture about how everybody is replaceable. One time I was late one morning. I'll never forget that story. So after that, I took a 1-year job. I worked for, I call it the time I worked for the mafia. I took a job on the Central Artery Tunnel project. I'm not really going to talk about that. It wasn't a great experience. I left there pretty quickly and used some connections that I had made at the reactor demo to get a job with Stone & Webster, and took a job at the Raymark Superfund site in Stratford, Connecticut. And I don't have any pictures of that, so I just Google snapshotted the Walmart and Home Depot that sit on top of that landfill now. And that was where I met the guy that I would consider probably the guy who made me want to be a project manager. And he's actually a close friend of Paul Hunt's. I didn't know that at the time, but a guy named Ray Goff, he was the resident engineer for the Army Corps of Engineers in that region in the Northeast. And I think it was out of the Chicopee, the Westover office. And Ray and I worked really closely together. I ended up on the office side of the management of this Superfund site cleanup, and I really learned a lot from Ray about documentation, communication, negotiation. We had a lot of those soft skills of a project manager. I started to learn those from Ray, and it was a really key connection that I made with Ray, and I still talk to him once in a while. I see him a lot on Paul Hunt's Facebook, but it was a really great connection, and I think that was one of the key, like I said, key places where I decided that project management might be in my future. So when that project ended, I went back to Boston and went back to the Stone & Webster office in Boston, and did a bunch of Army Corps remediation projects in the New England area. But again, the connections I made at Stone & Webster actually are the connections that brought me to ECC. So, back in 1995, that was where I really made the first connections that brought me to ECC. So this project here is a remediation of a building in the Charlestown Navy Yard, and worked on this and met Stu Kibbe, who some people know, some of you who are longer timers. Stu's not here anymore, but Stu actually turned out to be a really key figure in my own development, and his name's going to pop up a couple of times. And then I also met Pam Fody, who still works for us I think she's in Tennessee now. Pam and I actually grew up in the same town in Massachusetts. We found out after we met, but like I said, I learned a lot from both of them, even as far back as Stone and Webster. Pam was always a really great resource for regulatory compliance and learning about project management for remediation for the Army Corps of Engineers. So then from Foster Wheeler, from there I went to Foster Wheeler, New Bedford Harbor Superfund site. Actually took I don't know, I guess I would call it a sidestep, So sometimes your career, goes up and down, right? So I had been a field engineer. I became an assistant PM at Stone and Webster. And then I made a move to be a QC manager at the New Bedford Harbor Superfund site for Foster Wheeler. And again, connections that I made, all people that I still work with, right? Mike McSherry, Rich Joshua, Pete Vernon. Some of you guys remember Ray Francisco. I worked with all those guys and again, made really great connections with those people and learned what I could from them. And I still, Mike McSherry is a guy that I know I can trust. If I've got a hard question about health and safety, I can just go right to Mike. And we've got a long time. I mean, it's a 20-year relationship at this point, and it was really key to me. And it continues to be key to me to know that I have those connections. So at Foster Wheeler, I realized, I think that big companies are not for me. My first reactor demo job was for Morrison Knudsen, one of the largest construction companies ever. Then Stone and Webster, then Foster Wheeler, and word got out that I was not too happy at Foster Wheeler, and I got two calls. One through Stu Kibbe. I got a call, I think it was from Rick Ebel, asking if I wanted to come to New Jersey to work at the Wayne Superfund site. And the other call I got was from Franklin Environmental, who had been my sub when I was assistant PM at Stone and Webster. And the timing just didn't work out with ECC. There was some commotion that others know the story better than I do. So at the start of that Wayne job, so the timing just didn't work out, and I went to Franklin Environmental. And so the things I learned at Franklin Environmental as a project manager were that number one, I hate pulling tanks. They're a smaller size environmental company, and I really got tired of pulling tanks and getting phone calls at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon when some little old lady forgot to pull the gas pump handle out of her car before she drove away. But I made two other connections at Franklin. This picture here is another job site in Stratford, Connecticut, but that was the first time I met Paul Hunt. Paul had his own company at the time. He was doing some civil work for us on this soil stabilization job in Stratford, Connecticut. It was one of the first times I met Paul. And it was also the first time I encountered ECC. We got hired by ECC as a subcontractor to do some remediation at the somewhat ill-fated, at least from my perspective, F.E. Cooper site in Breezewood, Pennsylvania. Project went pretty well at first, but actually, it's funny, we were talking about rain this morning. The rain kind of ruined that site for everybody, compounded with an extreme change in quantities that came about. The site was much more contaminated than we expected. But that was my first experience with ECC, and and I had a great experience with ECC. They're a great. It was clear that they were a good company. Always honored. Did their best. So Franklin at the time, and this is one of the biggest lessons that I learned in my past is Franklin at the time was struggling financially. They ended up filing bankruptcy, and but at the time, when we would submit an invoice, we could call ECC, and the project manager was Van Jenkins. The program manager was a guy named Ali Sadria, and I could always call those guys. And if we were really strapped for cash, ECC would do everything that they could, despite the fact that I think they were not getting paid to pay us. And I think that speaks a lot to one of the key reasons that I love ECC, is that they're really oriented to that personal side of the business. And so back to talking about Franklin, I think I wouldn't say that there were a lot of specific mentors I had at Franklin. One of the things I really learned at Franklin was how much you can learn from the people that are often considered, below you in the org chart, right? So, I was a project manager by that point, but I learned so much from the superintendents, the foremen, the laborers about how work really gets done. And I think that's a really important skill for a project manager to have, is to really understand how the work gets done. There are a lot of companies with a lot of different project management models. I've worked for places where I've had project managers with accounting degrees, and they know contracts, they know accounting, and they're project managers. Not that that's a bad model. It's great for project managers. Project managers need to understand the finance side of project management as well. But it really is most helpful, I've found, if a project manager understands, at least in a basic sense, how the project goes together, what the schedule looks like, what steps have to happen. And I learned most of that actually at Franklin from the guys, on the ground, boots on the ground. So like I said, Franklin went bankrupt, and I stuck it out as long as I could. But then my phone rang. It was Stu Kibbe, and he called me and asked me to come to ECC. And so in 2004, I came to ECC. I don't have a lot of pictures of myself, so this was the first group of folks that I encountered at ECC, and it's began where it really was one of the best times in my career. Some of Freddie on the left, Matt Martin, Sue Whiteside's not here anymore, and Dave Como. And these were the team that I worked with on some Navy O&M task orders, running around all over the Northeast in our ECC vehicles, collecting and monitoring well samples, and did that for a while. And in the first 2 years at ECC, was really, I think, what locked it up for me, that it was a really great, I hate to use the term great place to work, but it really is a great place to work. Just everybody that I encountered when I came to ECC, had a high level of knowledge, and they were extremely dedicated people, and there was something to learn from just about everybody. And so I managed this O&M work with Darren Gaynor and all these guys here, and but I also started to support proposal work. Flew out to California, flew out to Colorado to support proposal work, and made some really great connections. And so and in that first 2 years, it's really hard to call out specific people that you consider, you consider key people in your career. But I want to point out that so one of the best sounding boards, one of my favorite people at ECC is Janet Stiffler. And I bring her up specifically because we're talking about project management, and Janet is not in the PMCX, right? She's in the marketing side of things, proposal development and whatnot. And but I've always found Janet to be a really great sounding board. And so, if you're a mentee and you're looking for a mentor, you don't always have to consider somebody that's specifically in the same path as you. You might find that you make a connection with somebody who is participating in a related part of the business, but not specifically in your department. And that sometimes can be a great resource for you to guide your career. So that leads me to another Stu Kibbe story, and this probably is one of the most defining moments for me in my career. And so I was doing this O&M work, and we were bidding a lot of remediation work. And at the same time, ECC was doing a lot of really, we had a huge growth period at that time. And there were a lot of really great, interesting construction projects going on all over the world. And in one annual review, I sat down with Stu and I said, how do I get to be a senior PM, and how do I get those big jobs? And so this is another bit of advice, I guess, as for somebody trying to take advice from a mentor. Sometimes you need a mentor who's going to give you the bad news, right? Tell you what you're doing wrong, and maybe not what you're doing wrong, but what you need to improve. And Stu basically had said to me that I was too blue, right? I was really I was a hoarder of work, and I had a hard time trusting people to manage things on their own. And so he said that while he could trust me to do a fantastic job on a small task order, that he didn't think that I knew enough about delegation and letting things go to take on a big contract. And luckily he and I had a great relationship by that point. I mean, I had known him since 1995, and we talked about it often. And I think he really helped me to build out that part of my to build out that part of my skill set, so that I could trust other people to do their job, and and find ways to delegate and really help move me along. So I think that was in 2005, when late 2005, when Stu and I had that conversation. Honestly, I was pretty crushed for a little while after that. But you realize that you asked for the help and you got the honest opinion, and you need to take a good look at yourself and move forward. And so I must have been doing something right, or maybe wrong. I'm not sure. But one weekend in May, I got a phone call from August Ackerbauer, and asked me if I wanted to go to Kuwait. And it hadn't really been on my list, but I think I had said probably too loudly at one point that I was willing to travel anywhere as long as I didn't have to wear body armor. And so Kuwait it was. So in May 2006, I went to Kuwait, and got off a plane, got in a car with Chris Miller and David Bluestein, and drove around Kuwait meeting contractors and meeting our client. And that really kicked off a really interesting, exciting part of my career, where we developed that program. I was only there for a few months at the start, but we kicked off that program. I got some really good lessons from Chris Miller and David about business development and what it takes to start a program. And and we did some really great projects, and I met some really fantastic people. Some of my favorite people ever. Lavina, our housekeeper, and Sandy and Cletus, and it was a really great kickoff to what turned out to be a pretty good program for us over the course of a long period of time. And so I think that's where I met Guy Simmons, Kirk Graves. We all, met a lot of the key people that are still here and doing great successful work with ECC. So Kuwait came to an end for me. Darren Gaynor and I swapped places. I came back and took over the Natick, Mass treatment plant construction. Took on some small projects with Brad Congdon up at New Boston, and then met the Hawaii folks. Met John Fern, Liz Webb, Kevin McCaskill, all those folks who are still here, and now I'm working with very closely. And we did a somewhat small project in Misawa, Japan. It's this photo here, placing a chiller, and it was an HVAC upgrade project for the Air Force. And as we were doing that, I got a phone call, and I was in Misawa, and was asked to stop in Djibouti on my way home. And so I stopped in Djibouti, and we put a proposal together on that project, and in a roundabout sort of way, won that job. We didn't win it the first time, but ended up going in with a second contractor who turned out to be successful. And so went to Djibouti and basically lived in Djibouti for 11 months. I learned a lot of lessons learned in Djibouti. This photo is probably the only 3 real cranes in Djibouti at the time. We had originally hired only 2 of them. I learned a little bit about resource planning and coordination. We realized at the last minute that the 2 cranes were not going to be able to pick these trusses, and so had to add the 3rd crane. That was a little bit of a scramble. I learned how to build a hangar, learned how to pave an airfield, pour a parking apron, learned how to build a Japanese bathhouse in the middle of the desert. But again, I think, the lesson I learned most was, that the workers in the field is where it's at. And this was one of the best run sites that I had. Our superintendent, Ed Drumheller, really rallied troops every day, had really good plan of the day meetings, great safety topics every day. And, just the guys, it's a difficult place to work. The people are relatively uneducated. So it take a little extra effort to get the work done. But we had a really great dedicated team. I got a slide of them at the end here. But the biggest lesson I learned there, I've got a whole hour-long presentation just about that job. So about lessons learned on that project. But mostly what I learned on that project was the value of good documentation and the value of change management. Because we finished that project and it actually turned out pretty good. You can see here on the site, top is what it looked like when I got there, and bottom is what it looked like when I left. But for 3 years after I came back to Massachusetts, 2 or 3 years, we fought a claim with the client there. And we had boxes and boxes of all the documentation that we had amassed, and all the change notices, and even signed change notices that they were refusing to pay. And so, we eventually quote unquote won that case. But Glenn Sweat, I'm sure, probably would agree that wasn't really wasn't really a great win for us. I mean, we in the end we turned out to be right, I guess. But 2 or 3 years of everybody's time, a ton on legal fees. It's really not the way you want to close out a project. But like I said, at least we learned a lot about good documentation and change management. And I got this slide out of sequence. This is the team that I meant to put on the previous slide. So this is our field team here. Well, these two guys weren't really part of the field team, but they were a big motivator every time they came to visit. So that's Paul. Everybody, I'm assuming everybody knows Paul and Stu. So came back from there and went to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. We actually ECC was really successful here, and we had really great little bucket of projects here that was, again, a group of all the people that we knew, and we were able to get some efficiency here. The project in the background was Building 178. This project on the left in the back was Building 92, and the one that's in focus in the front was Building 174. We were working all three of those projects at the same time. It was a total of about $100 million for us, all going on at the same time. Again, all the same people that I knew. Ray Francisco was managing Building 92, who I had known from Foster Wheeler days. We were just a really great group of projects. And but at that time, it's no secret, ECC was having a little bit of a rough go. And so I peeled off and took a little sabbatical. And I followed Stu Kibbe over to Consigli Construction. And what I learned at Consigli was the value of really good pre-construction, the value of following a solid pre-construction process. Now, their model's a little different than ours. Their clients are institutional largely. They have a couple of federal clients, but mostly they work for universities and hospitals and places like that. And so they get paid for pre-construction, which we often do not, or at least not specifically. And so they've got a really specific regimented process for it. But I honestly, at first, I really had discounted that it was of huge value. But by the time I had spent about 2 years there working on it, working just on pre-con, just learned a lot about planning, scheduling, estimating, all the, how a good planning process goes into a successful project. And this is the photo here is the Harvard University Smith Campus Center that I was the pre-con manager for the renovation of. Really crazy project, some crazy requests from clients, people with a lot of money, and willing to pay to get what they want, and very different environment than working for the federal government. Let's see. So moving on. So in 2016, my daughter decided, like I said, she decided she was moving to Los Angeles, never coming back to New England. And so I put some feelers out just to see what my options were. And again, ECC connections. I was talking with Billy McCoy, who was our construction manager for the Building 174 project. He said I should give a call to Kent User, who was another one of our superintendent CM PMs, who was now working in Hawaii. And Kent put me in touch with a guy who's now working for ECC, Tony Law. And Tony and I connected pretty well right off the bat and talked for a period of time. They flew me out to Hawaii, and I accepted a position as project executive for this $300 million rental car facility at Honolulu Airport. 1.5 million square feet of parking garage. And it was a 3-year job. And it's a convenient halfway point between Los Angeles and Tokyo. So I took the job and we moved out here. And this was my biggest project management lesson here is about ethics and toxic work environments. And that really is, as I've gone on in my career, I've realized how important the culture of the organization you work for is. I'm gonna gloss through this a little bit, but the general manager of the office in Hawaii for Watts and my project superintendent, they just had their own idea of what they wanted the job to be. And when you get hired to be a PX or a project manager, you've got an idea of what you want the job to be, and they didn't really want me to do my job. And there was obvious tension between Tony and these folks. Tony left the company shortly after I arrived, which was a little bit scary, right? You connect with somebody, and then Tony left, went back to the East Coast, and then there was just some really toxic behavior that I just couldn't tolerate. A lot of backstabbing, and just an environment you don't want to work in. It's projects are hard enough on a technical basis. The design for this was troublesome. We had a lot of fair opportunities for us to make the project right. As happens sometimes, the project was underbid in certain areas, but the design was bad, and so I'm a pretty straight person, straight and narrow, like to take the known path to solving problems. And we had really good justification for additional time, additional general conditions, and whatnot. But the management of Watts, not Tony, was hell bent on making the most of those changes, and really, in my perspective, maybe not in theirs, my perspective though, taking advantage of the situation. And so it wasn't an environment I could work in. So I only was there for 8 months. Met some really great people, some people that I'm still friends with, well, this is the project site itself, which is kind of a shame because it's a pretty cool project site to work at, to be honest. You get Diamond Head in the background. It's sunny, it's warm. But I just couldn't. I just decided it wasn't worth it. I think I cracked a crown. I was grinding my teeth at night. Maki told me I was miserable. It's just, it just wasn't worth it. The title and the really huge, cool job was just not worth it. And so conveniently, as luck would have it, I got a call from Celeste Hunt, Paul's wife, saying that the company she was with, CCI, was in urgent need of someone to run their Hawaii office. And so I went to work for them. I took that program from 2 million to 34 million. We started with 3 employees. We were at 20 people when I left. A lot of really interesting little projects. This is an auditorium renovation we did at Pearl Harbor. I don't have a lot of photos, but then I got a text message from Manjeev, and I got a phone call from Paul Sabrawal, and they were asking me to be a reference for Tony Law, who was coming to work at ECC. And one thing led to another, and here I am back at ECC. So, as much as I enjoyed CCI, it was a great company, great group of people. But one of the things that people told me when I gave notice at CCI was that I talked an awful lot about ECC when I was at CCI, and I realized I had done that pretty much the whole 5 years I was away from ECC. That I was constantly coming back to the people and the stories that I had at ECC. So I'm going to divert for a second into a little bit of technical stuff, and then I'm going to come back to something at the end here. So just in general, what does a PM do? For those of you who might be just starting out or considering moving your career along the project management path, you can come from pretty much anywhere and be a project manager. I was an SSHO when I started. I was a QC manager. You can come from the finance side and do project management, because it's about managing scope, schedule, and budget, but in terms of a whole bunch of constraints, risks, resources available, stakeholders, safety, quality. But really what project management comes down to is communication. And we talk about this all the time in the academic setting. It's project management's 85% communication, but really that is what a project manager does, is coordinates resources and communicates with all the project stakeholders. So how do we do that at ECC? At ECC, our foundation in the PMCX is this roadmap that's on the screen here. I eliminated all the processes so that I could blow it up to a point where you could see it. But it's pretty similar to the PMI model. So we've got five stages of the life cycle: initiating, planning, executing, controlling, and closeout. We use initiating as our proposal stage and our planning as our post-award stage. And then we've got our own knowledge areas, which revolve around those PMI knowledge areas, but we've added our own, environmental and safety component. We've got a design build component because it's a big part of the work that we do. But I'm not going to go through this. Like I said, this is not a PM training course, so I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'm going to show you the detail with all the, it's a bit of an eye chart, but but these are all the processes that ECC has developed over its long history, and that work for us in managing projects. This is the second half of it. The best thing to do for this is to just go to EchoNet and go to the PMCX section and click on the roadmap. And all of these have clickable links that link to either some part of EchoNet that includes the forms you need to know, or the SOP that you need to follow. We've got four SOPs: transition, execution, closeout, and change management. Transition to me is probably the most important. Change runs a close second. Maybe they change, they flip from time to time. Like I said, in my early part of ECC, or the middle part of my ECC career, I was bouncing around between a lot of projects, and it often happens where we don't finish a project, where a PM may not finish a project, right? We may move on to the next thing and hand it off to somebody else to do the closeout. And so that's, to me, it's one of the reasons that we've got such a focus on the transition SOP. It's really important that when you win a job that you transition it to the execution team, but also in the middle of a project, if you've got new people coming in, that you constantly communicate the information about what the scope, schedule, budget, what the status of the project is, so that everybody's always on the same page. So like I said, constantly going to that communication, core skill that you need as a PM to be successful. So, the roadmap is a lot about technical skills, and but the things that I learned most along the way in my career were about leadership and about soft skills. So, the slide here, I've got a few things. These are all the things that you can read books about. These, you can read books. We've got an ECC book club that we read a lot about these types of soft skills. But the best way to learn these is through mentoring. right? Is to connect with somebody within the company and learn conflict management and how to be proactive, how to be adaptable. You need to learn those things by doing them. You can only learn so much of those skills by reading books. And those things are really why I came back to ECC. And that, to me, that's really the strength of ECC. I always highlight integrity. It's a recurring theme in my career, whether it was when I was working for the mafia on the Central Artery Tunnel project, or my bad experience with the Honolulu rental car facility. This is right from our mission statement. Integrity is one of our mission statement elements, and it's one of the things that really draws me to ECC and keeps me here. And then also the core values. So friendship, people, safety, service, prosperity. These are the things that you really, when you connect with the people at ECC, and you really get a sense of that's who ECC is. And that's like I always say, it's, to me, one of the most important things in project management is the thing that keeps me up at night is I make a decision and wonder, did I do the right thing? And one of the things I love about ECC is that I'm surrounded by a bunch of people who help me make the right decision, that I know can support me in making the right decision, and that will have my back. And won't be afraid to tell me when I'm wrong or when I mess up, but they've always got my back. And that to me is the number one reason for being at ECC. And that's it. That's all I've got. Does anybody have any questions?
I'll just throw one out, Rob, to get people talking. Of all the jobs that you've done, you said you wouldn't name your favorite. Could you name one that was maybe the most challenging, or one that you learned the most from?
I always go back to Djibouti. It was challenging in every sense of the way. I was on a personal level, I was away from my family for an extended period of time. There were a lot of technical challenges, cultural challenges. We were a subcontractor to a Japanese prime working for the Japanese military. There were just so many moving parts to that. And then you add the fact that you're working in a resource constrained place with really loose rules. And I unfortunately, one of the things you learn in that situation is sometimes you got to be a little bit of a dad. And that was something that caught me off guard, to be honest, was how important those leadership skills were in trying to keep the team that we had focused on the fact that we were there to do a job, and not to get distracted with the environment we were in.
Thanks.
Rob, I have a quick question.
Sure.
This is for mentor or the mentees or anybody who is interested in getting into project management or wanting to learn more about project management. I know you'd mentioned there's a place on EchoNet for PMCX, the SOPs and all of that. But other than that, for starters, what would you recommend as the first few steps?
So it's a tough one.
are there outside resources that they can look into?
Well, I think, I have a tendency to go back to always go back to the PMI stuff, but I know that material is really dry.
Mhm.
But I think it always forms a good basis for the methodology of project management. The I honestly, I really think that the mentoring and connecting with somebody and to understand what to understand what's involved is probably the best path. I don't want to. There's no real specific, like I said, for me, there's no real specific path. The only other thing I would say is don't take any job that interests you. I mean, don't get hung up on. I've met a lot of people who get really hung up on title, and you gain a lot of benefit from, even if your title is PM, go be a superintendent, go be a QC manager, and understand what the technical side of that job entails. Educationally, there are not a lot of great books about construction management, in my opinion. I'll tell you, in the Northeastern program, we struggle to find great textbooks to guide people through what it takes to be a project manager, which I think is why we teach around the PMI methodology. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a really. I'll do a little bit of research on that, though. I don't have a really great answer for it. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I love that idea that it's really important to connect with a mentor or someone in the organization that actually has that background and can help, because I think you're absolutely right. There's material out there, but just diving in and getting your feet wet is with somebody who knows is really important. So for those of you who haven't signed up for the mentorship program, I'm just going to put a plug in now. I would highly recommend signing up. We do have a lot of mentors available, and if you're interested in joining, I do highly recommend that. Glenn, I know you had a...
There's a related question in the chat. I think it's related to the one that Rob just answered, from Candace at Little Rock. Rob, I don't know if you've got your chat open.
I just saw it. So I personally, I do think there's value in that kind of education. Like I said, even though the books are not that great, it at least a construction management degree or a project management degree, it does force you to run yourself through what the project life cycle is, what the proper steps are. We've tried, we've done a pretty good job, in my opinion, more than a pretty good job, to be honest, with the roadmap that we built, and with with building all those processes in. But it never hurts to have that academic discussion about what a project should do. That's because everybody knows that what a project should look like and what it actually looks like when you're in the middle of it is very, very different. But it's always good to have that. In my experience, it's always good to have that academic, the ability to step back and look at it academically and say, all right, well, what should I do here? Even though the circumstances may not necessarily allow you to take that academic approach, I think the academic approach has value.
Hey, Rob, this is Ethan Mahoney here on Camp Lejeune, and I just had a quick question. So I'm a superintendent. I currently have a great relationship with my project manager, and I think I understand what he expects out of me. But what do you expect out of project superintendents, and what are some stuff that you've seen that they've done really well, and maybe even some stuff they've done really bad? That's
a really good one. So I'll tell you, we for superintendent, I think one of the biggest areas that I think we ECC need development in is in making sure that we understand that we are in charge of the project. And we're the ones who are guiding the project. We have the vision for the project. And so one of the things that I see, and it's not just ECC. One of the key skills that superintendents need is their ability to look at the project from a big picture perspective and make sure that the subs are moving in the right direction and have that, sort of project manager's vision. Because sometimes superintendents will draw that line. They'll say, oh, big picture schedule, that's the PM's job. My job is 3-week look ahead. And that's really not the case. I think especially if you're thinking of moving up to a PM type role, having that foresight, being proactive and managing subs, I think it's a really key skill for superintendents. I think to me that's one of the big ones. I think that's really sometimes we as a company also don't put superintendents in a position to succeed either. We may give too much weight to, especially because we have a tendency to go to the super sub model, and so we have a tendency to let the sub run the job. And I think it's a really important. It's really important that we do make sure that the sub knows that they're a sub. Is that helpful?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Glad you got your hand up.
Hey, Robert, Glenn Davidson.
Yep.
First and foremost, a good presentation. But as I listened to what you had to say, what I heard over and over again is about relationships and resources. Mm-hmm. And everything that we do is about our relationship and our resource and our ability to get along with people and manage those people. And of course, with Natalie and this mentor program, that goes hand in hand with that. And at the end of the day, all I want to say, it's all about our resources. And I can see that you bleed ECC, and that's nice. That's, I respect that. I think a lot of us do. And I think our culture, we've had some hard times in the past. You talked about those a little bit. And some of us have been through hell, and we know that. And we are alive today, and we're breathing well, and we're growing, and we're growing our people. And again, it's about resources, how we deal with our resources, how we train them, technical knowledge, technical skills, so on and so on. And this mentor program kind of breeds that into, furthering ECC policy for all the people that we have, the new people we have, mentoring those. So that's why this program is very, very important. But good job on the presentation.
Excellent. I see Candace had a follow-up. So how do I handle being over different projects? Is it difficult? So I think that comes back to the time management and communication management, and I'll go back to the advice that Stu gave me in learning to delegate. I think for me, that was the hardest part, and that's why I think about that conversation that I had a long time ago now a lot, because I realized it really was holding me back. But it's still honestly the hardest thing that I do. It's really hard to take something that you can do in 15 minutes and to give it to somebody else and let them do it, knowing that it's going to take them an hour. But you know what? The next time it'll take them a half an hour, and the next time it'll take them 15 minutes. And then we've built more resources within our company to be able to do things. I have one less thing to worry about. And that's really the key to being able to manage multiple projects at the same time, is being able to know that all right, I'm on a plane back to Massachusetts from Misawa, Japan, but I know that Jeff Kokinos and and the team out there have got it, they got it covered. They can handle it, and delegation is really the key there, and making sure that and being comfortable with that. So it's a lot of work, though. I won't lie to you. It's a lot of work. Anything else? I think that's it.
Yep, and we're right at the hour. So thank you again.